Hello, everyone. We are thrilled that you are joining for this webinar, From Risk to Resilience, a financial institution's playbook for cyber assurance, presented by Picus Security and powered by CUInsight. We have a lot of great information to get to today. Just a couple of quick housekeeping items. As always, you will receive a link to this webinar recording by the end of the week, so you'll be able to refer back to it if you would like to at any point in the future. Secondly, our presenters are happy to address questions from the event today, so please feel free to use the Q&A box. If for some reason we can't get to questions today, we will follow up with you after the event. So that's it for housekeeping. Let's get to the good stuff and why you are here today. Financial institutions, including banks and credit unions, share common challenges and opportunities in cybersecurity and risk management. Today, we're going to gain insights from industry experts regarding Adversarial Exposure Validation, or AEV, which provides visibility into how attackers can exploit vulnerabilities. AEV technologies not only simulate and emulate real-world attack techniques to focus on the most significant risks, but also help automate threat-led penetration testing and ensure compliance with regulatory standards. Picus Security, the leading security validation company, reveals true cyber risk by validating and prioritizing exposures across siloed findings. Offering adversarial exposure validation with breach and attack simulation and automated penetration testing, Picus enables teams to pinpoint critical gaps, deliver high-impact fixes, and stop more threats with less effort. With that, I'm excited to introduce our panel of experts for today's discussion. Alper Memiş, co-founder and CEO of Picus Security. Brian Pickie, Chief Information Security Officer, Technology Risk Executive at City National Bank of Florida. And Dana Turner, Chief Information Security Officer at Union Bank and Trust. So let me bring them all on camera for us here. And then I will clear this screen out of our way. All right. Sorry, a few little technical things there to get us set up so everyone can see us all. Perfect. So welcome to all of you today. We're excited to have you join us.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So we will jump right in. And we're going to start with trying to kind of lay the foundation for commonalities of concerns among folks watching today in this industry. And so a question to all of you, and maybe Brian, we'll start with you on this one and we'll kind of roll through. What are some common cybersecurity pressures that keep financial institution leaders such as CEOs, CFOs, and CIOs up at night, which I'm sure you are all very familiar with this, particularly around cyber uncertainty, regulatory compliance, and strategic risk exposure? So Brian, I'll toss it to you and then we'll do a round robin here.
Thank you, Linda. No, thanks for inviting me. I think it really comes down to, we try to understand what is that threat landscape, right? What are we exposed to? Where are we investing our resources and our controls? How effective are those controls in mitigating those risks? And so there's a lot of known knowns, right? And there's a lot of unknown unknowns. And I think on that scale, right, that's where we worry the most. What have we not thought about? What have we not, done a scan for? What have we not assessed or analyzed? And we can do, because in this space, you can do 99% of the things right. That 1%, that one little thing that didn't get done quite right. And of course you want layers, right? You want multiple layers and opportunities to prevent and detect and respond to things. But, inevitably there's something that goes sideways. So again, having these types of tools in place to help us continue to kind of shine light on that and remove that fog of war, the better. But that for me, it's always that nagging question: Have we done enough? Have we done enough? Have we done everything we can? I think you're muted.
Yeah, Linda, you are muted.
Just like that.
Here
Just
I
that
am, the
thing.
one always reminding everyone you're muted, and I mute. Brian and I were talking before we got started about all of the, variables that are constantly changing. So, right, those unknown events. So, Dana, let me toss it over to you.
Sure. Actually, I don't know what more I can add to what Brian had said. I mean, he did a pretty good job of explaining it. I always call it FUD, fear, uncertainty, and doubt. And obviously, the different roles at sea level, there's different stressors, there's different things that keep them each up at night. Ultimately, it does get down to control effectiveness. And one of the things that we see quite often, and I know that my peers see, is that as soon as something comes up in the news, whatever, I think the last one was SharePoint. That was the big thing. Immediately, all the emails start going out. What is our exposure? Where, are we susceptible to this? Is this something that we need to be dedicating resources to? So it's all those things, and that's where control validation is absolutely key to being able to put that fear, uncertainty, and doubt to rest, and give actionable information and build on the intelligence that you already have to actually prove that you are protected in these different areas and you don't have gaps.
Great. I love that acronym. I've never heard that, fear, uncertainty, and doubt. I'm sure that is prevalent in that area of the industry, I am sure. So Alper, let me toss it to you in terms of kind of wrapping that all together and what you see.
I think, one of the most fundamental changes that we have seen in the last decade in, really cybersecurity is cyber risk really now becomes a boardroom priority, right? So I think one of the fundamental changes also that we are seeing, and hopefully it's going to be the norm going forward, is cybersecurity is seen less as a cost center, and more organizations are perceiving it as one of the most critical business enabler, as it rightfully, right? So, and financial industry, if you look at, the here is taking the lead, possibly followed by healthcare industry. And I think, for banks or credit unions, the risk visibility, understanding the risk on the board level and the executive level can no longer be abstract or delayed, right? So boards expect continuous business relevant insights into evolving threats. Both Brian and Dana mentioned about the control validation, right? That's how the evidence-backed progress in reducing those risks could be possible. And also, with increasing cyber breaches, one of the top questions that are directed to cyber, security teams, and, Dana mentioned about is our readiness against emerging threats. If a financial institution X, Y, Z in the state that we are operating, let's say, unfortunately got breached, the question that you will get is, okay, are we ready against the state-sponsored actors? Because financial organization X already got breached, right? So I think we are way over the days that we assume that we are secure because we already have the policies and tools in place. So I think both cybersecurity leadership and boardrooms are really looking for really validated responses.
Yeah, the ever evolving, right?
Yeah.
Great. So let's jump into now kind of the tactical components for those listening today. I know that's a really important piece. So many finance leaders and board members grapple with uncertainty in managing cyber risk. To tackle these problems, security managers are adapting a new approach called Adversarial Exposure Validation, or AEV, as we'll use that acronym multiple times today. So let's dive in with each of you here to explore how AEV directly benefits executive level decision making. And Brian, I'm going to start with you. And can you share how AEV gives boardroom executives clearer, actionable insights for strategic decision making, and maybe also a high-level example from your institution where this validated clarity influenced these decisions?
Sure. So CISOs, CSOs, we're charged with understanding the threat environment, understanding our critical assets, and how effective we are in managing those risks and those threats to those assets. So while the board members and maybe our executive teams, they may not be speaking that speak and looking down in those weeds, that's our job, right? So we're looking at that. We need tools that help us understand that landscape. I'm not a good steward of organizational resources if I'm not able to articulate and prioritize where the risks are. And so that's what these types of tools start to help us do, is to communicate that in context and in terms that they understand. So there's that special sauce that we bring to the table as security executives, translating the technical to the strategic. I often frame it in three groups. There's assurance work, there's hygiene work, and resilience work, right? And most of the things we do, the metrics that we have, things like that, all the investments we make are improving one of those three buckets, sometimes all at once, depending on what that kind of solution is. And so these tools are going to help illuminate, again, where is my biggest risk? Where are my control gaps, right? And then I can make investment decisions that are justifiable through more objective means, as opposed to using, as Dana mentioned, the fear, uncertainty, and doubt, those more nebulous ways of influencing the need for more money, more personnel, more tools, whatever it may be, process changes. There's a variety of levers we can pull. But that's what sort of this AEV, these breach attack simulation sort of tools start to help us do.
Makes sense. Yeah, and we spoke earlier about the importance of being able to translate this for those of us who are non-cybersecurity professionals, and
Sure.
certainly, especially to your point of budget and resources, that's a key piece. So Dana, let me jump to you from a board level perspective. How does leveraging solutions like breach simulations and automated pen testing streamline high stakes compliance reporting and the decision-making process from your perspective?
So from my perspective, I think this ultimately gets down to the old Russian proverb of trust but verify. There are I have a lot of peers that are new into their organizations. Fortunately, I've been with mine for over 30 years, so we've been able to build up a rapport with our board from before it was called cyber. We called it network security. So we've been working on this for a very long time, but it's ultimately about trust. And with a lot of peers that are coming into organizations and building or rebuilding programs using validation techniques and this automation, this whole new set of tools that's coming out. There's a lot of things that we've done over our 30 years of validating our controls. Now we're starting to automate that process. It's repeatable, and the information that's coming out of these tools it can be trusted. And so I think that that's absolutely giving boards a much higher comfort level that the money and resources are being utilized effectively in our cyber operations inside of our organizations.
Yeah, it makes sense. One of my former credit union CEOs loved the trust but verify concept. It's very prevalent and very relevant. So Alper, let me toss it to you with kind of reflecting on that, and from the Picus side of the fence, what are your perspectives on the industry as a whole?
Yeah, I think, obviously Brian and Dana as practitioners, they really, frame it really well, right? So obviously Gartner is also mentioning about, exposure validation, adversarial exposure validation. And then I think, what we are really seeing is there's a major industry shift towards exposure validation that's really becoming a standard practice. But to Dana's point, I mean, these are the things that most of the cyber practitioners were doing, but now there's a chance to automate it. And also remediation piece is very important, right? It's not only about understanding your gaps, but it's also how you really fix this. So I think we as a company has always been to move organizations beyond, static point in time assessments to continuous, more evidence-based assurance, provide more automated approach on doing that. I think this is where the operationalizing, I mean, in cyber, we use a lot of acronyms, 3 letters, 4 letters, but it really comes down to how you really operationalize adversarial exposure validation is how, when you do that, leaders can clearly see which risks are truly exploitable. Why it's important? Because they need to understand the business impact and act on that insight, right? So I think the main outcome that we should be looking for with AEV is, again, okay, what are the certain pillars that really create risk in an evidence-based manner? So which exposures are really truly exploitable? but also when we know which exposures are truly exploitable, what are we going to do about it, how we are going to fix them, and how we really automate all these actions is the essence here that we are really looking as organizations.
Right.
I'll add it also helps us go from the subjective, right? We're using a subject matter expertise, our experience, right, to make these decisions. And now we're moving to more objective, right, evidenceable rationales that we can bring to the table. We have audit logs, we have a history of patterns or system generated, evidence that we can use, especially in a highly regulated environment. They want to know, why did you make this decision and not another decision? So the rationale and justification for certain investments, for certain control enhancements, things like that, not just at the board level and executive resourcing level, but also at the audit and control level at the from the regulatory perspective. So it really covers quite a wide range of stakeholders who benefit from having this type of, again, very objective tooling.
Yeah, and I'm going to, I guess, build on that a little bit. So when you see that board level confidence improve with that clearer understanding, using that evidence-based, how does that help their response to the exposure of cyber threats and, what they need, what they can bring to the table and support those initiatives?
The more that the board understands the way you speak, right? Because in early days, we're translating the technical, the cyber, the less understood. We're translating that sort of into the risk management and business speak. And when you begin to have this, objective, metric-driven, again, sort of information you can bring to the table, then they start to understand. They may ask about that now. Hey, how's our threat landscape looking? A better probably example is vulnerability management. I think most boards now understand the importance of vulnerabilities and they understand the importance of incidents. So I would hope that almost every board member, if you talk about cybersecurity, vulnerability management, incident response, those are two of the really kind of top things that they're should be asking about or be aware of. And so this just continues to add additional, again, tools in their toolbox that they start asking about. What's our threat?
Yeah. Okay. I cannot tell if I am frozen. Can you hear me, Alper? It looks like Brian.
We can.
Yeah,
Brian just got frozen.
I
in
think
the
it-
last
Oh, there he is. He's back.
Please
seconds.
proceed.
Just I wanted to make sure it wasn't me because then nobody would know what I was asking. So, okay. Yes. Thank you, Brian, for that clarification. That was great. And now let's kind of transition and build on the points we just discussed about AEV's role in giving executives kind of those clearer, actionable insights. What cybersecurity investments have you found deliver the strongest ROI? Because we always know that's a focal point, as it should be for financial institution boards. And how has validated risk management shaped strategic decisions and resource allocation at the executive level? So I'm going to have all of you kind of jump in from your perspectives. And Dana, we could start with you on this one if you want to jump in on that.
Sure. So again, just kind of building on what I had said before with our particular operation that we've been working on honing our skills over 30 years, right? And it's always been through manual validation that we've been able to show, okay, these are the areas that we can get the biggest bang for the buck, if you will. So particularly, let's take phishing. That was something that is always going to be an issue for organizations. We were through the control validation process, and albeit manual, we were able to show, okay, if we can reduce the ability for users to actually even be able to click on messages in the first place, it's going to reduce the that threat vector literally to zero, which we have over the last 2 years. But that was just one area where we were showing that if we put somewhat of a good investment in that area, we could really reduce the risk level in that area to zero. And then that would enable us to go in and focus on the next area. And unfortunately, it's usually one of those where people are still involved. So, but you always need people to do the work. But that's one of the things that we've learned over almost 3 decades now of validating our controls, that that does work. And again, having tools like Picus that are automating those processes. Our board really understands that, when we come and we say, hey, when we report high, medium, and high level gaps up to the board, they know that those are the areas that we need to focus on. It's clear, concise for them. They understand this is where we need to put some more investment in, and it's for us. We've gotten very good responses from them. So I can attest again, albeit the manual processes, the validation piece really does work, and anything that you can do, again, to automate that, come up with a programmatic, repeatable process, you're just in much better shape.
Yeah. When you said phishing, it instantly brought me back to my credit union days when I was in either lending or L&D, and they'd send the fake test emails, that, and everyone's like, don't click the link. So yeah, the people part of it is where a lot of the risk lies for sure. So Brian, anything?
That is the point. We want to instigate that spidey sense and have you guys talk to each other about, because you do see big phishing campaigns. So that's important. I'll say, I look at it in three ways, right? There's the practical security. Are we keeping the bad guys out? Are we allowing people to get access to the right things, the right time, and for the right reasons? And so if I could have a perfect information security program where all of my controls are in place, but if I can't evidence it, if I can't do risk evaluations, if I can't articulate it from a compliance perspective, where those controls are and how I'm managing the risks to the organization, I've only gotten halfway. My job's not quite done right. So having tools like this will allow us to do that, have that conversation at that next level. Again, I could have the most secure environment in the world, and if I can't explain it to somebody or justify why we're in that why we're in that positionally situated, I failed in my communications job, right? And my risk and compliance mandates are going to be hindered. So that's another reason why we have so many tools in our toolbox, technical tools. But they have to hook into our various processes. So you also have to have a good, risk assessment process, a good control, validation process, a good way to report those metrics to your various stakeholders. And that's what, again, tools like this help us do.
Yeah, fantastic. I know we were always big on data, facts, and figures, right? Regardless of your business line, that's what helps push things forward.
They say what gets measured gets managed, right? And so if we're going to develop metrics and we're going to have key risk indicators, key performance indicators, OKRs, right? Objectives and key results. If we're going to have these metrics to communicate and align back up to the company's objectives, what is the vision and the objectives of the organization? How do I tie all the work we're doing in security back to supporting the technology mission and vision? How do we tie all the technology work back to the business? This is just one additional tool in that toolbox to help continue to support that message.
Yeah, helps tell the story, right?
Yeah.
So Alper, let me again bring it back to you.
I think obviously Brian and Dana really paint the picture perfectly here, so I can make a slight contribution. I think really if you look at the ROI angle, so from our security investments, normally you expect these technologies are reducing our risk, right? So this only happens when you really understand the ROI from them, when you validate things, right? What do I mean by that? Because what we have witnessed, and what we know, and Brian pointed out, is more dollars spent into cybersecurity, more tools that we really invest, does not necessarily translate into more security, right? Mm-hmm. So how you really operationalize these tools really becomes the validation angle. I think, what I can really add, in order to get most out of our security technologies, we need to be able to validate them. That's where the real ROI comes. Technologies are great, don't get me wrong. There are great technologies out there, but when we usually work with organizations, what we really see is, on average, organizations are really preventing or detecting sometimes less than half of the threats. They have all the technologies are there. They're amazing technologies, but from an ROI angle, which means that 50% of our investment is not utilized. So you can't expect it to be 100%. There will always be this imperfect balance between the business continuity and security, but you should be able to know where you are in order to make informed decisions. So I think that's the key here.
Yeah, and I don't know if any of you have any thoughts to share with the listeners of are there particular cybersecurity metrics that resonate most with boards or C-level executives that demonstrate the clear value in ROI, that kind of those key metrics that might be most helpful for people in your roles?
I'll jump in. So every organization is going to have different priorities, but most of them have some common priorities. And your metrics can center around more compliance things. So think of things like configuration drift. Your configuration drift might be more compliance focused, but it could be risk focused if you understand what the value of those assets are, what that control environment looks like around that, and how the risk is changing as far as the likelihood of a breach, the likelihood of a data loss event that might affect those critical assets. So when you begin to quantify that, and this is really what we're talking about, is just risk quantification. Most of the time that is translating that cyber risk into dollars and cents, or a financial loss event. But before you get to that point, you have to understand, again, what are the risks to those assets. So as far as metrics, I mean, some of the key ones in the financial sector, most of the time they're going to be talking about some sort of hygiene component, right? Are you staying on top of your vulnerability management and your patch management programs, your configuration management? Again, the three of those, configuration management, patch management, vulnerability management, those three work very tightly together. They depend on asset management, so good inventories and things like that. But if you've got metrics around those three key ones, you're really speaking to the hygiene. Access management is another key metric area, as far as who has access to what, right? What kind of privileged accounts exist in your environment? Do you have multi-factor authentication or some sort of tool that's going to provide that additional assurance layer on identity for those privileged accounts? And so what kind of coverage you have there. I think the organizational maturity is also important. So in early days, you might be asking, do I have good EDR coverage, for instance, right? Do all my endpoints have, whether it be antivirus or EDR, or whatever terminology you want to use in your organization, do I have the right coverage? And then it becomes kind of taken for granted. Once you're 100% deployed, you don't need to necessarily report that metric every single time, maybe. But again, that's on the hygiene side. On the resilience side, you get into non-technical things like business continuity plans, disaster recovery tests. Maybe it is backup, and recovery point objectives. You get really technical into the specifics around the resilience side. But your incident response capabilities, right? Have you run those penetration tests and done those simulations? And then finally, the assurance side. Again, that governance side. Do I have the right standards? Is my control library and my risk register up to date? Have I tested all of my controls in my control library on a cyclical basis? That could be real time or continuous control testing, which is the high bar where we want to be. Or you could be doing it on a cyclical basis, monthly, quarterly, annually, sometimes, depending on the importance of that control. If it's a key control, again, that's why we look at tools like Picus. You want to be validating that it's effective on an ongoing basis, right? That continual control testing capability. And that's, especially in financial services, the bar is being raised constantly on us to say, hey, your peers are starting to adopt certain tools. You need to be adopting those capabilities as well. And they don't speak to specific brand, types of tools or companies, but they speak to the capability, your ability to, articulate and justify and quantify the risk and the effectiveness of your program overall.
Great. Dana or Alper, anything to add to that on the particular metrics? Anything different or additional that you've seen or have
No,
insights
I think
to?
Brian did a fabulous job of explaining that. The one thing that I was going to point out that he touched a little bit on is in relation to maturity. The thing to keep in mind is that as your programs mature, your capabilities mature, your metrics are going to change. They need to change. You need to focus on different things. Constant process improvement. If you're not going back and reevaluating where you sit, the things that you're looking at, just reporting a number for the sake of reporting it and the number never changes, that's a pretty good indication that you probably either need to do a better job of addressing that area or find something that's actually more meaningful. So really, as organizations mature, they should be changing those. And the metrics that people look at, they're all over the board. I've always told people that 73% of all statistics are made up. And really, when it comes right down to it, from my perspective, I want to know how we do from a regulatory perspective. Obviously, we want to hit those. We want to be in compliance with the different standards, the different regulations, but we want to exceed that. And so, are we consistently meeting those baselines and then exceeding them? Those are the things that are important to me. But that is taking into consideration all these other metrics areas that Brian was speaking to.
Alper, anything on that?
No, I think, these two gentlemen summarized it super well. So nothing that really on my side. Thank you.
All right. So, Alper, I'll stick with you though. If linking back to our earlier points on how AEV delivers evidence-based clarity at the executive level, can you expand on the narrative of more data but not more secure? Why do top executives often face growing confusion and diminishing returns from traditional cybersecurity methods, despite having all this abundant data that we were, kind of referring to?
Yeah, I think, these guys are doing an extremely difficult job. So, and, also, our followers today who are in cyber industry, because, they are bombarded with data. So in cybersecurity, on average, depending on the maturity of the organization, that's something that we discuss as well. But we use multiple technologies. When I say multiple, really multiple, like it really depends on the maturity of the organization. From 10 to 50, 60, we use different technologies, which means like we get data about our vulnerabilities, alerts, different risk scores from different technologies, compliance scores from the dozens of tools. So in a way, we are using so many technologies to understand even just our risks. So adversarial exposure validation, and what we are really trying to achieve is a risk management, a new look to the risk management. But doing that, you use different technologies. So all these technologies, if you look at Linda, really provide real value. But the problem, they provide real value in isolation, but as they are siloed, so you end up with different set of priorities, and there is no comprehensive understanding of your risk. Because one technology, to help you to understand your risk is telling you, okay, these are the 10 things that you need to focus on. You are looking at a different screen, it gives you another 10 priorities that you need to focus on. But if you look at from board perspective, or like, decision maker angle, boards don't want to know everything. They really want to know what is actually exploitable, that can really impact the business, and whether they are addressed or not. So I think that the challenge with most of the, the traditional approaches that we have been using treat all the data like they are the same. Actually, that creates more data, but really in a way, more noise. So we know that we can't patch everything. We know that when priorities actually aren't validated, we face diminishing returns. So more spend, more dashboards, more data, but when they are not, really understood in a more comprehensive manner, this really results in less actionable insights. So that's the main dilemma that we are having at the moment.
Yeah, and so Dana and Brian, Dana, I'll go to you first, but in your roles, do you have specific instances where this concept of the CFOs or CEOs being overwhelmed by data or noise, as Alper said, just with all of this information without actionable clarity, can lead to frustration and or strategic risk based on the inability to kind of parse through if there's just too much coming at them?
Yeah, so from our perspective, again, I'm kind of a unicorn since I've been in my role for such a long time. I have to go back to a couple decades ago, and the big thing that we had to focus on is something that Brian brought up. It's defining, coming up with a lexicon, a definition for all the different terms. That's the biggest thing that we had to do right off the bat, was make sure that we were all that everybody understood the words that we were using, what they actually meant, And once we did that, it started making things a lot easier from, again, building a trust with the board that they knew, we were effectively managing risk inside of the IT organization. But it really goes back to having conversations with the various individuals on your board, getting in front of them. I know I've heard from a lot of my peers that CISOs don't necessarily have a seat at the table. You can make a seat at the table. It's just having the conversations, making sure, asking if there's things that the various people on the board don't understand, because you're going to run into, even with our board, we have some that are highly technical, some that have been around for decades, and they still don't understand the ones and zeros side of it. But we've done a good enough job being able to define those different things, to put them into their terms that they understand. So it's easier for them to look at the information that we provide without overwhelming them. And it's just easier for them to take a look and say, okay, yeah, I get that. And to their credit, we've had some that have become fairly technically savvy over the years, just because of that education and defining the things and breaking it down into terms that they can understand and having those conversations. So I don't know if that necessarily answers the question or not, but that's what we've done. It takes a long time. I mean, these are all things that you can't just do overnight, but it's something that's been highly effective for us over the years.
Yeah, no, I think that's great. And whether it's boards or CEOs or whomever, you're right, that background of not having that in-depth knowledge is where that challenge comes in. So yeah, I think absolutely relevant. Brian, anything to add or expand there from your side?
Yeah, our job as the chief information security officer, chief security officers, our job is to filter and translate all of these technical risks. I often, you can't, Dana sort of said it, we translate the ones and zeros into dollars and cents, right? We have to translate our world into their world. And so when it comes to business speak, they understand risk. The boards understand risk management. They are very keen. They're very expert in that space. But they look at it from a strategic, operational, reputational, compliance, financial. They have different lenses by which they look at business risk and technology risk, that all the risks that emanate from the use of technology. Our job is to help manage that and translate it into those categories of risk so they understand where to continue to pull the levers of resource management and make those investments correctly. And so we're at the nexus of that business translation and the risk management translation. All CISOs are risk managers, whether they come from a technical background, a GRC background, or a business background. And so we all have to, rise to the occasion and lean into that space to be able to have that level of dialogue with the C-suite, with the management committees, the board committees, auditors, regulators, you name it, right? But especially up to our key stakeholders and shareholders, right? So they understand how we're doing it. We don't accept risk on behalf of the organization. Risk acceptance is a treatment of risk. We manage risk. We present the risks. We try to use the resources we have to manage that risk down. And where where maybe an AEV solution is telling you you've got uncontrolled risk or too much exposure, we want to shift resources to that. And if I'm out of money or out of people or having processes that aren't effective, those changes, making those organizational changes, getting that top level, top down buy-in requires those kinds of conversations.
Yeah, it's great. It's marrying all of that together, the strategic side, the resource side, the information side. So yeah, absolutely. Alper, anything, we kind of started with you and come back to you, anything that resonated with you that they were speaking about to add to your original thoughts?
Yeah, I think, obviously we talk about, more data, but in the end, how you are going to process data into something meaningful is something, that we discuss about for us to understand cyber risk. And there is another pillar, how you can really transform that risk to a business language is something, that we discuss as well. I think if you look at our positioning, our approach, I think what we are really trying to do, really transform all this overwhelming data into a single validated view of real exposure. and
Mhm.
showing not, just what's vulnerable on paper, but what is actually at risk on your unique environment is something, that's very, very key. I think if you look at today, I mean, vulnerability management is something that we have been doing for a while. And let's go a little bit on the cyber side. And 60% of the vulnerabilities are marked as critical, right? So but are they really exploitable or not? And we have all the security controls in place, and why there is a disconnect between the vulnerability management and security controls. And boards can understand that too. If you really transform into more like exposures in the business language, that's what Dana and Brian are doing in day-to-day as well.
Yeah, being a translator, right? A lot of it into
Executor and the translator and operator, you can find like as many.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I'm sure that's in the job descriptions, right? I'm
That's
sorry,
in the
Brian. go
job.
ahead.
No,
Okay.
no, that's the one thing I was going to add. It's all about contextualization. So it's taking all the data, and the one thing to be said about data is to Alper's point, you actually need, in order to make good decisions, you have to have more data. You have to have more telemetry coming in. So, being able to automate these processes, have them be repeatable, explainable, where you've got this massive amount of data coming in, it actually does allow, that's how good business decisions can be made, is by having that massive data coming in and putting some context around it, specifically for your organization.
Yeah. All right, we're getting close to the end here, but we do have a question that came up. So I'm going to toss this out to the group here. How quickly can boards and executive teams realistically expect clarity and visible strategic improvements after adopting AEV or adversarial exposure validation? So just kind of how quickly can they expect to see results, and from your experience? Or
I think Brian and Dana should answer that because I'm
Yeah.
super biased. So in a way, because AEV, like by its nature, shouldn't be like something abstract or long-term premises. I mean, you need to see the visibility. You need to have the visibility very fast. I think in our experience, most of the organizations, I mean, it doesn't have to be us, but using our technology can really block twice as many threats in just 90 days after the visibility. Then you keep building. But again, I'm biased, and I'll give the word to Brian and Dana.
I'll say this: it's like the first day you got your vulnerability scanner, right? Most organizations have a vulnerability scanner in their environment, and they already are used to reporting those things. So imagine, if you never had a way to scan for vulnerabilities in your environment, and then you got the tool. You're going to be educating the management teams, the board, on what this tool is, what it is now providing us, and you're translating that information to them. They'll quickly understand. They're not stupid. It may just be a space that they haven't worked in yet, or they haven't seen dashboards for. So that's sort of the first, I wouldn't call it shock, but it's that first initial exposure to this new information and the way that they can rely. How do they use that information to make decisionings, right, or other resource decisions and prioritizations? So that's sort of the initial stages when you first adopt the tool, and then from there it just makes things easier, especially even on the beyond the security team, on the technology side, that the team that's responsible for patching and maybe changing configurations or fixing the vulnerabilities, right? They now can refer back to that tool to double check, to say, hey, we made all these changes. Was it effective? So you think about it from an ROI perspective. We did all this work. We made all these changes. We invested in, maybe it's, patching certain systems, or maybe it's a whole end of life upgrade they made. Now you're able to say, hey, look at the reduction in our exposure. And so you've got another tool to just validate all that work.
So I'll throw out another term that I like to use, depends, because it really ultimately does depend on again, the telemetry, the data that you're pulling in. Every organization is going to be a little different as far as what they have, as far from logging from available systems. So different connectors being pulled into validation tools, your capabilities, your resource levels internally. But the big thing to remember is that ultimately what's coming out of this is prioritization. It's showing you exactly where you're going to get the biggest bang for the buck, where you need to focus on, which gaps are the most potentially damaging to your organization. So that's where the ROI is going to come back on tools like these almost, I would say almost immediately for most organizations, even if they don't have a lot of data sources. They're going to get something back out of this to show them, you know, this is where your largest exposure is. This is where you need to focus on. So it depends on the organizations, but I think ultimately, you know, the value should be pretty clear very quickly for most.
Great, thank you all for that. As we're wrapping up here, you'll all see a poll pop up in front of you if any additional information would be helpful for you, so you can take a look at that. And as we wrap up, I'm going to toss it back to all of the speakers. Any final thoughts, any key takeaways you want folks to really focus in on, or just any ending thoughts from each or any of you?
I'll just say, you know, this ultimately comes down to risk appetite, right? What is the risk appetite of the board? What is the risk appetite by which management is supposed to manage within that threshold, right? If you've not had those conversations, then you need to start there. And then determining how you are within that risk appetite, right? Control effectiveness and the risk management pieces, all the things we've been talking about, ultimately all boils down to how much risk do we have in the organization, and am I okay with that amount? And that's not up to management or the operations teams to determine. It's up to the board to determine and quantify. And if you've not had that conversation, that'd be the first place I'd start asking and pulling the string, pull the thread with your risk teams and with the management teams to say, what is our risk appetite? That will help continue to justify, you know, kind of where you're at in the organization as far as your risk management activities. And of course, controls, right? That's the business we're in, is security controls. And that'll help sort of mirror or align the two dimensions.
Great. Dana, any thoughts on your side?
Yeah, to that I'll add the biggest piece of this is knowing your assets, making sure that you have a very good understanding, up-to-date inventory of computers, APIs, you know, everything from a technology, a software that you're using, that you have a very good up-to-date listing. I know Picus can help with finding those things in the environment, but that is the key starting point. If you don't have, along with the conversations that Brian was talking about regarding risk appetite, if you don't have a good handle on your inventory and your assets, your results are going to vary wildly. So really, if I could stress one thing, make sure you've got your assets identified.
Great. Alper, you want to wrap us up on the
I can
insight
just
side of the fence?
build on that. So I think, you know, in cyber, you know, like we are here to reduce cyber risk, right? So, and then to do that and understand, and also like give the answer to the question, are we secure? I mean, to Dana's and Brian's point, there's the risk appetite piece of it, but you need to also first understand where you are. So I think we definitely need to give the first question, okay, if you are going to answer, are we secure? Okay, where am I? And in order to give the answer to where am I question, can I really provide a defensible, evidence-based, you know, answer to that one, rather than the, you know, because we already talk about, I think, you know, we always have this sense of security because we already invested a lot into different technologies. We talk about the ROI piece of it, but are we really getting most out of it? And are we ready against, you know, emerging threats, state-sponsored actors? I think all these questions should be really be reflective of the, you know, the more like an evidence-based approach. Are they really exploitable? So I think the key here is, if you are going to improve some certain things, we need to move from assumption to validation, and that's very important part of, you know, our cyber resilience.
Fantastic. Brian, Dana, Alper, thank you for all that information, to
Thank
Picus
you.
Security for presenting this event. For all of you watching, listening, please feel free to reach out to Picus for more information. And you'll all receive a link to the recording by the end of the week. And we thank everyone for their time today. Everyone have a great rest of your day.
Thank you, guys. Really appreciate it.
Thanks,
Thank
Linda.
you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
you.
Bye.